Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today to learn about Tucson's Pedestrian Safety Action Plan. Today, in this session, Krista Hansen and Felipe Ladrone are going to take us on a deep dive into the City of Tucson's Pedestrian Safety Action Plan to learn how Tucson is working towards positive, sustained safety outcomes. The Department of Transportation and Mobility teamed up with Kittleson and Associates to conduct an in-depth pedestrian crash analysis and then identify a pedestrian high injury network to prioritize future improvements for pedestrian safety. This session will explore citywide crash data, dissect the causes behind the statistics, and outline the development of a clear, actionable plan to improve pedestrian safety on Tucson streets. The presentation will be given by Krista Hansen, and Krista is the lead planner with the City of Tucson Department of Transportation and Mobility. She has led development of Tucson's Pedestrian Safety Action Plan, is program manager of Tucson's Shared Mobility Pilot Program, and works on a variety of projects related to traffic safety and public engagement, as well as Felipe Ladrone. Felipe is an associate engineer with Kittleson and Associates. Felipe's 19-year career has been focused on traffic engineering and transportation safety. He has substantial experience in traffic operations, safety analysis, complete streets, and highway safety manual applications. Felipe graduated from the University of Arizona. All right, Krista, why don't you take us away?
Okay, great. I think I should be unmuted here. So yeah, thank you for joining us. And like Patrick said, I'm Krista Hansen at the City of Tucson, the Department of Transportation and Mobility. I'm excited to talk through the Pedestrian Safety Action. It's been a ton of work working with Felipe and his team at Kittleson, as well as the Pedestrian Advisory Committee, and then our Technical Advisory Committee, which was made up of internal staff at the Department of Transportation, as well as the Police Department, representatives from Public Health, and then also our Pedestrian Advisory Committee. So there's a lot of work that, a lot of different people that have gone into this project. And oopsie. So first of all, for the Psap, I'm going to be referring to the Pedestrian Safety Action Plan as the Psap for ease here. And so sort of what is a Pedestrian Safety Action Plan? So this is Tucson's citywide plan that both looks at, takes a deep dive into the types of crashes that are happening around pedestrian crashes to both try to understand the causes and the risk factors of pedestrian crashes in Tucson, and then also prioritizes a high injury network in order to prioritize limited funds for safety improvements, and then targeting areas of the greatest need. And then also the real bulk of it is the action plan, which is identifying really tangible strategies and tools that we can do to make our streets safer and more comfortable for people walking. And these were the three goals that were kind of based off of the materials were developed off of, safety being the priority, and kind of, as I said, have been investing in the area of highest need. And then also the goal of connectivity, of creating this connected pedestrian network, gets people places that they need to go on their daily needs. So why does Tucson need a pedestrian safety action plan? If you're not aware that Tucson is both a bicycle and pedestrian safety focused city, it's a designation from the Federal Highway Administration in terms of having a higher rate of pedestrian fatalities and injuries compared to other cities our size. And so developing a Psap is the first real step to figure out the why, the why things are happening, and then figuring out what we can do about it. And so this is 10 years of data up here, but for this, we looked at 5 years between 2018 and 2018. There was over 1,200 pedestrian crashes during that time, and 96 deaths and close to 250 severe injuries as a result of those crashes. And so as you can see here, on the first graph here is looking at the percentage of people involved in crashes and then compared to the percentage of people who are killed in crashes. So this was just data from 2019. And to give you an idea of vulnerable road users, you know, and looking at if a pedestrian is involved in a crash, their chances of survival are much lower than someone who has the protection of a vehicle. And so while, you know, people walking were only involved in 4% of crashes on our streets in 2019, they made up close to 50% of all of our traffic deaths. So it's pretty startling when you think about it in those terms. So for the pedestrian crash analysis, and Felipe is going to go into this in more detail, but I'll just give kind of a big picture look at it. But so we took obviously our data 2014 to 2018, and then we're looking at both segments and intersections, as well as a number of additional factors. And I've just listed some here, but so trying to look through it with the lens of not only these crashes, but is there presence of a street light? Are there signals? Are there transit stops nearby? What's the time of day? Is there lighting? And then number of lanes on the roadway. Is there a presence of biking and walking facilities? And then also, what were the actions that were leading up to it from both the driver's side and the pedestrian side? And then looking at demographics and access to motor vehicles. We know that, you know, people are going to be on the street more when they're maybe lack access to a car, rely on transit, rely on walking and biking. So the analysis was really just taking a deep dive and looking at all these factors of trying to paint the picture of why are these crashes happening and what are the contributing factors. And so out of this came, and I'll just highlight some of the risk factors. So this is thinking of predominantly looking at our streets, and when we're meaning 35 miles an hour and higher and 4 to 6 lane roadways, which makes up kind of, you know, pretty much the backbone of our street network in Tucson. But time and time again, so we're seeing, you know, about 80% of pedestrian deaths and serious injuries are occurring on streets with speed limits 35 miles an hour and over. And this is seen across, you know, the country, and this is not, you know, we know that speed is a really critical factor in people's chance of survival if they were hit by a vehicle. And so looking at these multi-lane, 35 miles an hour roadways. And also what we found out is that of the pedestrian deaths, they're happening on a relatively small percentage of Tucson streets. And so this is useful in the sense of if we're looking at, okay, 90% of pedestrian deaths and severe injuries are happening, you know, on just 11% of our streets. This gives us an opportunity to really focus in on this high injury network, which we'll go into more. And then also this time, just highlighting that 70% of crashes occur within 300 feet of a bus stop. And again, just putting, highlighting the fact that exposure and, you know, anytime you're accessing transit, you also have to walk to and from the bus and to and from the stop. So really looking at, you know, populations that are more at risk, and again, using these risk factors to focus in on safety countermeasures. So Felipe is going to do a lot of detail on the high injury network, but so I won't go into it much, but I'll just, you know, highlighting here what came out of the whole crash analysis, where we were able to identify both crashes along here, and then there was factors of equity, transit ridership, and risk factors that were all brought in to develop this high injury network, which is going to be a really important tool, has already started to be and will be an important tool for not only prioritizing projects, but for hopefully getting future funding and attention to the need. And so the big kind of bulk of it is this action plan. So what are we going to do with all this information? And we had, so there's 4 main categories: engineering, education and outreach, policy, and then data-driven enforcement. And then of those four focus areas, there's 9 sort of key strategies with a total of 35 more specific action items that fall under those strategies. And so these 35 action items are made up of all 4 focus areas. And I'm going to go through and just highlight 1 or 2 examples to give you an idea of what it looks like. So first of all, for engineering. So what I think is a really useful tool in terms of thinking of how this plan is going to play out tangibly is we've not only have these 35 action items, but I highlighted 2 here that are very specific in terms of numbers. And so they're very trackable in terms of installing, I think it was 4, enhanced crossings improvements per year, installing an average of 10 low-cost safety improvements, including new signing, signal timing, different things. And that's a way to both track be accountable and transparent to community members, but also a good tool for tracking our work. And these actually have already tied into our 5-year traffic safety plan, which is more of an overarching looking at all modes of transportation. So this has been a really nice tool that we were able to roll a lot of the pedestrian focused action items into that. And so then we have, policy. So 2 examples here are, so looking at, we did a whole review of all of our internal policies that the city follows that are at all related to pedestrian safety. And so the plan gives really specific recommendations on things that are tangible ways that we can make small sort of tweaks and changes to our existing policies that both provide sort of protection for our engineers and also just set a standard for this is how, we want to do things, somewhat, focused on the transit ridership. So looking at amending our existing bus stop policy to allow stops to be placed closer to any enhanced or any crossing. And that is something that we've already started through with our internal team of how we can make that change. Also education and outreach. And so there's a number of things that we're doing a couple I want to highlight. So we've done a number of quick build projects. This is from the intersection at 6th Avenue and 7th Street, which is just now going away because it's a construction project is coming through there. But basically we want to continue to support these quick build projects. And one way of doing that is to come up with design guidelines that really streamline the process for community members to get involved. And I tied this into sort of outreach as it's a really great tool to both get people involved, but show people what's possible with our streets as public spaces, give people a voice in, the process around this stuff. And so we see that as both an opportunity of not only improving safety in sort of an infrastructure engineering way, but also educating people about it and getting them excited about it, involved in it. We've also been working on a really targeted campaign that looks at, that uses the data that we have found in the Pedestrian Safety Action Plan to do really targeted messaging. And so this was a pilot program that we just started, our slow down yard sign program, and just focusing on speed as one of a major contributing factor for pedestrian safety. So we had 500 that were free when people filled out a traffic safety pledge online. And then this is actually in my neighborhood that I saw, and this is my beautiful dog, Tess. And let's see here. So last one, enforcement. And so we worked very closely with TPD throughout this entire process. And a big, really wanting a big emphasis on data-driven enforcement and education over citations or fines. And so two kind of pieces here that tie into both our high injury network. So working with TPD to focus our traffic safety, their enforcement violations on actions that are resulting in severe injuries and deaths along our high injury network. And so being really strategic about violations and enforcement, and then also keeping the emphasis on collaboration, education with community partners and neighborhoods. This is a photo of an officer who came out to our intersection traffic mural installation project at Ochoa Elementary School. And it was a really fun way for in the safety aspects to connect with the community. And I think they end up having a really great time with it. And lastly, I'm going to hand it over to Felipe to go into more detail on stuff, but the Pedestrian Safety Action Plan is available online. So I have the website here, and we have a PDF version which you can download and read through it in more detail. And with that, I'll turn it over to Felipe.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about the pedestrian crash analysis that we did for the plan, how we prioritize locations in terms of severity, risk factors, and equity, and also how we utilize a high injury network for systemic improvements and also site-specific recommendations. Something important about the plan is how we get, how we are here in the final. We started with reviewing the current efforts, what the Department of Transportation and Mobility has done previous to this plan. They did have done a good job in, developing the HOG. It's known nationally, where Dr. Nancy was developed here in town, and also all the important factors like the 22nd safety corridor. So we started with a review of the current efforts in terms of the safety analysis and plans that they have done, and then we went to analyze crash data, prioritize locations, select countermeasures in terms of systemic and site-specific, provide key recommendations as the one that Krista went over into different areas, and then provide a final plan, a final document. So I was explaining the different steps that we took to go to the final plan when we started reviewing the current efforts, analyzing crash data. As you can see, prioritize locations, select safety countermeasures on both systemic and site-specific locations, and provide key recommendations for the plan. We started with a crash analysis, pedestrian crash analysis, and for that, we developed a comprehensive database that we included data from different sources, including the police department, the Department of Transportation and Mobility, PAG, the local MPO. In the data we included, it was of course the crash data, but also road characteristics, traffic data, and demographic. In terms of the data that we collected for crashes, for pedestrian crashes was from 2014 to 2018, as Krista indicated. And the information that was included in the crash data is a very typical severity, time of day, location, pedestrian actions, and roadway characteristics. The first thing that we look at the data was to evaluate all modes, compare all modes and pedestrian crashes by year. I see in this graph on the left side we have all modes that has risen at least to 2017, a slightly decrease in 2018 of 7%. In the pedestrian crashes, there were a total of 1,200 crashes in the 5-year period, and the biggest jump was from 2015 to 2016 with 28%, and it was a slight decrease from 2017 to 2018, which is 5%. In terms of injury severity for the pedestrian crashes, we found out based on the five years of data we evaluated that pedestrian crashes are 8 times more likely to result in a fatality and 4 times more likely to result in a capacity injury. As you can see in the graphic below, there is a big discrepancy or difference in terms of pedestrian vulnerability. We see that 1% of crashes for the all modes resulting fatal compared to 8%. But as the severity goes down, you can see the big difference, how in terms of the for vehicles I call PDO, property damage only. Those represent around 46%, but for pedestrian, it's only 9%. This is a very important information that we encounter analyzing the data. As you can see, when we evaluate that using the GIS database that we put together for the project, you can see the crashes frequency, the crashes, and the posted speed. As you can see from the graphic on the top, the majority of the crashes, as Krista indicated, occur on roads with 35 miles per hour and 40 miles per hour. And also, the severity for those crashes is substantially higher than for the lower speeds. For the table below is something very important. When we distribute the crashes and assign it to the different roadway classifications, we find out that almost 85% of the crashes occur on only 11% of the city roadway network. That's something very, very important to distinguish from this graphic. Likewise, for the fatals, almost 50% of the fatal occur on only 3% of the roadway, of the city roadway network. When we evaluate the crash data based on the function classification with local, collector, arterial, speed, and urban freeway. Something important that we did for the crashes is when the crashes happen. And as you can see from this graphic, there was a high number of crashes that occur between 6 and 9 p.m. So, and also, it is interesting to find out that the severity of those crashes, particularly from 7 to 9, was higher the distribution than from other times of the day. We also took a look at who is involved in those crashes. What is the crash severity by age? And as you can see from this graphic, the majority of the pedestrians involved in crashes, the age ranging from 15 years to 25. However, the severity for those crashes, pedestrian crashes, is lower compared to the severity having of a person involved in pedestrian crashes, with age ranging from 55 to 60 and so on over here. Something that we will expect, that we're expecting. Another aspect that we took a look is in terms of race. How was the crash in terms of the population? The majority of the crashes share is very similar to the race that was indicated in the records of the crash. There was a little lower for Hispanic, but also it was 14% unknown, not reported, and may be related to this gap, this race over here. So we have this beautiful database with 1,200 crash radios. We put that into GIS. We assign those crashes to intersections, if that was appropriate, using a buffer of 250 feet, with the idea to conduct a crash severity analysis. For that, what we use for the mapping and neighborhood screening, we utilize a concept from the highway safety manual called equivalent property damage only. By using this concept, we were able to account for all the severity of the crashes. And we do that by assigning weights or points to those crashes. So if it was a fatal crash, we assign 100 points. Same with injury incapacitated. If it was only a non-injury crash, we assign 1 point. So using this weighted table, we were able to come out with this crash severity. The way we did it, we have a list. We define a tier 1 EPDO scores and tier 2 that we were able to rank by severity the locations for pedestrian crashes within the city. Since we have a robust database with additional information beyond crash data, we utilized the database to identify risk factors. And for that, we took a look at the following aspects: transit ridership, stop bus presence, roadway geometry, the number of lanes, posted speed, median presence, signal locations, roadway lighting, and intersection type, and the presence of marked crosswalks. And based on the analysis, having everything in GIS allowed us to connect and identify risk factors. And analysis indicated that the intersection finding for risk factors at those locations within 200 feet of a bus stop that has 1/3 of the ridership. Also, signalized intersections with 6 or more lanes and speeds higher than 25 miles per hour. That's for intersections. For segments, we found as a risk factor 6-lane roadways, or in segments when stop bars were located within 300 feet and more than 2,000 feet away from the marked crosswalk. Another important aspect, particularly for pedestrians, is equity analysis. For that, we took the concept developed by the Oregon Department of Health that provides a way to estimate an equity index. The equity index was developed using data from the American Community Survey. It includes, race, income, number of households without cars, seniors over 75, persons with disabilities, and other important data that we use to apply this equation that was provided and utilized in Oregon and has been used in California to account for equity. Since we have everything in GIS, we developed a transportation disability index for the entire city. It's probably hard to see over here, but the darker the color are the areas with higher disadvantages from transportation perspective. So we took this map and we overlapped that with the tier 1, tier 2 pedestrian crash locations. So we can come out with areas of the city that have transportation disadvantage and also relate with high injury locations, pedestrian crashes. So we have 3 aspects of crash severity, risk factors, and social equity. In order to prioritize locations, we combine those factors. And the way to do it, we have good conversation with the transportation department and good feedback from the stakeholders on what was the best way to do it. We evaluated 3 alternatives: doing by equal weights, when we assign a 33% of the value to each of the factors; severity weight, when we provide more weight to the EPDO score; or severity and equity weight, when we weight those 2 factors by 40%. These are the results of each of the prioritizations. Based on the feedback that we provided in discussion with the Transportation and Mobility Department, we decided to go with an equally weighted score and develop a list of the ranking locations for when pedestrian improvements can be implemented. It is important to know that in the analysis, we realized that even varied the weights, the top 25 locations, they were very similar. The only difference was the ranking. So I was just to say, the action plan encompassed 4 aspects: engineering, policy, education, and enforcement. And those are key for a successful plan. In this case, I just want to focus due to a time limitation, focus on the engineering aspect. As Chris indicated, we went with 2 types of solutions. The first one was systemic solutions. So for the systemic solutions, we in the plan includes 2 aspects. One is a treatment toolbox. In the treatment toolbox, we provide implementation or solutions for pedestrian crashes based on safety contrameasures for pedestrian crashes based on different conditions. And for instance, it's very hard to see on the slide over here, but in the pedestrian toolbox, we can have the benefits of adding an exclusive pedestrian phase, the disadvantages, when that should be applied, and other guidelines that should be considered to apply that pedestrian toolbox. And as Chris indicated, something unique about the plan is very important, and the city is actually using, before we even finalize the plan, is the high injury network. The high injury network was developed using the pedestrian crash data. And it's kind of similar, using the if we can imagine a 1-mile slide rule that slide across the network and connect those top tier crashes and other information together to develop this high injury network. Something important to mention is that by doing the high injury network, we can include the locations when 90% of the fatal and severe injury crashes happen in the city, and it's only 4% of the total city network. So one use of the high injury network is to, for instance, identify locations when systemic improvements, countermeasures can be applied. For instance, one of the questions that in the conversation we were trying to provide the city with guidelines is where to implement leading pedestrian intervals for protecting left turns. In the case of leading pedestrian intervals, well, say, we have the high UA network. We know the locations with the high riderships, transit riderships, that can be used as a proxy for pedestrian volumes. So we overlapped that and we came out with a manageable list of locations where LPI should be considered. Another application of the high UA network is for hog locations. The city has a very good system to prioritize locations, and as you may know, they have implementing hogs through the year at multiple locations. So what we did is we took those locations where there were hog crossings, as well as the locations included in the list for future installations, and we compare that, overlap that with the high-end UA network and the locations with high transit ridership. And in most of the cases, we came out that either there was already a hog installed at that location or proposed for that location, but we came out with also a small list of locations where should be considered to install hogs, since it's part of the high-end UA network and has high ridership data. In terms of site-specific countermeasures, we developed some what we call count sheets for some locations that were prioritized based on the severity, risk factors, and equity. We developed, cut sheets for some of those locations that include, you can see an example in this slide, the pedestrian crashes that happen over the time frame that we evaluated, including some of the characteristics. Also, the site characteristics of the location that was evaluated, including presence of median, lighting, access, transit use. We went to a field and make some observations of some behaviors and document that over here, and then suggest the countermeasures that were classified in like near term or low cost and long term countermeasures that can be implemented. So that there is money funding available, those countermeasures can be implemented. Another aspect that we, in terms of a project site specific, we develop a list of pedestrian safety corridors. Those are 1 mile or 2 miles corridors, small roadway corridors, when low cost improvements can be implemented that can consist of signing or flashers or some ramble strips to alert drivers of the presence of pedestrians, particularly at night, as we can see on the crash data, where there's higher severity, the pedestrians are present, with the idea that these corridors can, this additional engineering, signing, ramble strip, lower speeds at night can be implemented, but also there can be police enforcement can be implemented. So when we developed this list was also those the corridors in the police department list. So it was a nice overlap. They were aware of some behaviors that they wanted to observe and provide enforcements. So now that the list is back up for about the trash data, and it's part of the high UA network and the police department, the cities, the Department of Transportation and Mobility, as well as the police department are moving together to make implementations and do enforcements at this location. With that, I believe that's the last slide, and we can open for questions. Here is our information. In case we're not able to answer the questions at this point, feel free to contact us. Back to you, Patrick.
Great. Thank you very much, Krista and Felipe. Really interesting stuff and totally important and needed in the city of Tucson these days. I think this is a critical planning effort for improving pedestrian safety on our streets, which has certainly been an epidemic in the last couple of years. And with that, I can open it up to the audience. If anybody has any questions, go ahead and enter them into the chat box, and I can read them to our two presenters to share any additional information about the work they did on the Pedestrian Safety Action Plan. I'm not seeing any at the moment, so as we wait for those, I just want to ask you guys, kind of what activities did you do to raise community awareness about this planning effort or engage community members around the priorities for pedestrian safety in English, or did you do any bilingual work?
I can jump in, and then Felipe, if you want to add to it, but I feel like a big piece of our engagement, which was hugely helpful, was working closely with the Pedestrian Advisory Committee. So they are a citizen body that informs mayor and council and all city departments on pedestrian issues. And they were involved in, so Felipe came and presented at our monthly meetings, and they were able to provide feedback and edits and back and forth. And so it was a really great time to get really detailed input from them, as well as our technical advisory committee, which was even more involved. There were some members from there, but then also just other members from the community. So that was a great way to involve our stakeholders.
Great, thank you. And I have a question from attendees. This is for Krista. Krista, how often do you anticipate updating the Psap? Given that this document is based on crash data now over 1.5 years old, and assuming ongoing improvements to the high-ranked locations, I expect that there will be a lot of change in the highest ranked locations as time passes. Yeah,
that's a great question. We haven't identified specifically how often it will be updated, but I think that it's huge, and we left some sort of general language in terms of keeping it up to date with crash data and using that to keep the high injury network up to date. But I think that's a conversation that we should really put in writing in terms of whether it's every 3 years, and it also, I think, will tie very closely with our 5-year traffic safety plan. And so those are both tools that this is kind of like under the umbrella of that, but that's the way that we're really using to track both our progress and stay accountable on this stuff. And I see the high injury network as a really important tool for that. So yeah, I think we need to clarify exactly how often it needs to be updated. I think that's a great question, comment.
Great, thank you. And still waiting on additional comments, or in the absence of questions. So what's next for the Psap? You've completed the document. Is it going to then go to mayor and council for approval citywide, or how is this kind of going to get integrated into departmental practices?
So this is going to get, this is tied in again to our 5-year traffic safety plan. And so, and that's a plan that has gotten approved by mayor and council, and it's, we give updates to mayor and council on it. But that's looking at all of transportation. And then, the focus on pedestrians is when we focus on our most vulnerable road users, and we're making improvements to make it safer for them, we can see improvements across the board for all modes of transportation. So this is not going to be, well, it is definitely its own, focus and standalone thing. It ties in with our 5-year traffic safety plan. And also an example where we've been using the high injury network, which informed the projects that are being identified through our Move Tucson effort. And so already we're seeing it as sort of the tools of this that are informing future projects and planning efforts.
Great, thank you very much. Looks like we have about 4 minutes left, still not seeing any additional questions. So I'm just curious for people in attendance, are there kind of key lessons learned, key takeaways I think you can share as diving into the data, kind of some examples of what you saw were some of the best practices that you employed in the development of this planning process? I know you touched on a number of them in your presentation, but just kind of breaking it down for a quick takeaway.
Felipe, I'd love to hear your input on this if you want to start it, and then I could.
Yeah,
share some
absolutely. You know,
recent insights.
one of the lessons learned, you know, the importance with working with the police department. I think it was, it was very important to have the police department as part of the TAC members, as part of the TAC meeting, part of the TAC, and having, have the input of those meetings. Even from the beginning, comparing the crash data that we were from the transportation department, but the police department collects. So it was important to understand how the data was collected so that we can do a better analysis. Also, one of the findings on the data is that, as we say in the presentation, that we find a connection between the ridership or the bus stop with high riderships in town within the city limits. But it's also important to know that the riderships or the transit, the issue is also that those bus stops are located on roadways or collectors that provide a feed that amount of pedestrians to those locations. And so that's kind of a couple of lessons learned.
We have a question from a member of the audience. Has there been any discussion of adding rails or other physical barriers near bus stops to ideally reduce the potential for pedestrians crossing at unmarked locations? I've seen pedestrian crashes near bus stops, which were only a couple hundred feet from a signalized crossing.
I would love to bring the moderator in on this question too, in terms of Patrick's our Complete Streets program coordinator, but I know that from my knowledge, it hasn't been a conversation on a bigger department level in terms of a specific policy around this. I know that we have put in some barriers and thinking of Tucson High School and trying to get kids to cross right at the crossing rather than jump across, back and forth between the intersection. But Patrick, I don't know if you, on the Complete Streets program side, if that's part of the discussion at all.
I think it's something we're looking at a case-by-case basis. I know there was some, they're taking a look at it at the design of Grant and Alvernon, where we have two high-frequency routes that cross each other, and there are a lot of transfers at that location, looking at ways to kind of channelize and encourage people to use the signal. I think within the Psap, what we're looking at, as well as through the Complete Streets initiative, was kind of reducing the restrictions at the distance that we require between bus stop location and signal location, looking at the far side stops to really make it easier and encourage pedestrians to not kind of take the path of kind of shortest connection across some of our major roadways. But thank you for bringing me into the conversation, Krista.
Yeah, in the plan, I just want to add that we have reference to documents prepared by agencies outside of the state in California or other places where they have been taking more proactive role in terms of safety at bus stops. And they have developed guidelines that incorporate that.
Great. And thank you very much to both of our speakers, and thank you to members of the audience for tuning in. It looks like we are at noon, the end of our session. So appreciate your attention and the great presentations you're given, and thank you very much for your time, and enjoy the rest of your conference. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a good rest of your day and a great weekend.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.